I'm trying to learn TM, so that's why I'm trying to sign up for this class and see. So I just want to go through the demo and see what it's going to be like.
Company, and I have worked on European as well as US projects. And with TM, I have worked all through GTS, integrations with CRM, integrations with EHS, integrations with ECC, and also integrations with EWM. And just to give a brief overview about me. Now, let's just go ahead and see what this module is all about. Then we can actually have a better discussion. Shall I proceed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, as we all know, right now, why we are focusing on TM, like I'll also touch with a few of the points from SAP side also. Initially, when we see at least a couple of years before, I would say we never heard much about the module called TM, though this module was existing for about 10 years. So why all of a sudden there is a sudden surge and increase for this module? Because this is at its virgin stage, and it was so for the past 10 years, but very slowly things started to develop, and now in this present situation we see that the importance of SAP TM or transportation at a higher scale rather is gaining its importance. So why? Because when we see, as we all know, now we need to optimize a cost. So in this cost, now companies also started to take transportation into feature. They understood that the transportation cost should also needs to be leveraged. Now, taking a simple example, let us say we have suppliers, and supplier is supplying some raw material to us, and we as a manufacturing unit are turning these supplies into an end product. So we are rather doing a process where we are manufacturing. Now after manufacturing, we are selling it to customer, whosoever at whatsoever with whatsoever different types he may be, but by the end we are selling it to a customer. So if we see in present days, what's happening is customer is not interested to buy if the price is high. And at other side of the coin, the vendor or rather the supplier is not ready to sell, at a far discounted rate, because he also has so many industrial customers other than us. So somewhere they understood that to leverage this cost, because input costs only at to one particular point you can reduce it. The break even is not so much when it comes to input cost, but when it is coming to output, the customer is equally expecting a cheaper price, and we cannot we can at a point of time there were certain strategies used like MRP2 and things like that, which are now actively part of PLM, that is product life cycle management, where they are able to reduce the production cost, but production cost by itself is not giving a good leverage to the companies, because the supplier is in no way ready to reduce the discount apart from his break even point. So this is from this instance it started that people started to realize that we need to have a better control. It's not that industries are not looking into transportation cost from the start, but certain new strategies came into picture and they wanted to adopt those new strategies, which we will look into it. So as the screen says, in battling competition where every business is heading towards cost optimization, a logistician needs to understand both logistics operations and transportation functions. So if you see, we have differentiated logistics operations and transportation functions because these are two different things. Now, since you guys worked on ECC, in ECC, whatever we speak about logistics execution. we never speak about logistics planning. Why? Because ECC is a transaction system. In an enterprise, whatever transactions are done are registered in ECC. So there we can never treat it as a planning system. And in ECC also, just to clear few doubts, so there is a module called transportation, which comes under logistics execution. But that transportation is not relevant to planning. Now, what is the difference between logistics core operations and transportation functions? Transportation is actually a part of logistics. It's a minute part which is taken out of logistics. So when we look into when we look into logistics, we actually mean at a very higher level, we mean how you are actually trying to design your goods flow from from your starting of supply chain, that is from your vendors, till your end of supply chain, which is your customers. So in sooth, that is what logistics can be explained as. Now when we look into transportation, transportation is not about how to move the goods starting from your suppliers to customers. It's much deeper and it's a completely different perspective. It's about how to manage your trucks, how to manage vehicles, how to see that you can effectively use the vehicles, and how to see how to load different things into the vehicles, and how to see that the resources like drivers who are working for the vehicles, and different costs whatever are there, how to capture those costs. So if you see, it's from a complete different perspective. Logistics doesn't include resources. Logistics never speaks about resources. Logistics only speaks about some execution factors, like what? Like a packing unit, like a delivering unit, like a handling unit. So if we see, logistics is more inclined towards a different aspect of transport, what can we say, movement of goods. But when it comes to transportation, it doesn't actually look into these things. It is more interested in details of transportation only. So when we look into the second point, that is what it says. Transportation industry has successfully embraced all aspects of logistics planning, that is the most important thing, and execution by influencing profit maximization. So how profit is optimized for transportation industry? By few practices by which they optimal, by coming to optimal transportation costing structure, by effective customer committed date, effective utilization of transportation space, addressing of international compliances, handling alternate routes, addressing general safety and compliances for transported goods. Now, all these things we need to look into each and everything. Only then we can understand how different or how unique this module is, or we would get more depth into the module. The first thing we see here is maximization by optimal transportation costing structure. Now, I would like to take more examples on SD and MM here, because both of you come from that platform. Now, when we see optimal transportation structure, we normally, when as a company, when it actually receives any in OTC department, we receive certain sales orders. So when we receive the sales orders, we already quote the price to the customer. When we quote the price to the customer, most of the times it also includes the transportation cost, or it also includes the transportation cost. But frankly speaking, how defined is this transportation cost? Like when we take an example of, let us say, a make to order industry, where the customer demand has come now, and you are into manufacturing where at least you plan 1 month in advance. So it would take 1 month for your goods to be manufactured, so that you can send this back to customer. So you have received a a sales demand today, that is, you created a sales order today, and you have a delivery date, let's say, in the month of October. So how real is our process of capturing the transportation cost? If you see most of the companies who have adopted ECC, some companies what they do not capture the transportation cost at sales order. And these companies what they do, instead of capturing at the sales order level, they try to capture the cost during the time of goods issue. That is the date when they are trying to issue the goods. On that particular day's transportation cost they want to calculate. It is a very good practice, but it creates a lot of difference when it comes to the pricing structure, because our pricing structure is devoid of transportation cost. And if we see the second thing, customers committed date. Very often we see when we are working in ECC environment, we have sales orders and purchase orders. So in a sales order, we have something called as delivery date. That is, it is the date when you are ready to commit your material to the customer, or rather, it is the date when you are ready to deliver it to your customer. If we see, the delivery date really holds no significance in SD or in MM as a matter of fact. You create a sales order and you have a delivery date, let's say for the month of October. And if your material is available today, in spite of having the delivery date as October, you can still create the delivery date to delivery tomorrow. And if you have the delivery date in the month of October, and you can still create the delivery in the month of December also. So, I mean, I am not speaking from system perspective, because sometimes the system's behavior can be changed by changing the logic. But why we are speaking this is basically the logic behind how this architecture is set up is it really doesn't, the sales order or delivery or the purchase order really doesn't look into the delivery date control. It only looks into how to determine the delivery date. Based on delivery date, it either determines the material availability date, or based on material availability date, it determines the delivery date. And when it comes to MM, based on inbound goods received date, it would determine the committed date. Apart from these two, once the delivery date is determined, there are no other controls which take place. So that is what we mean when we say customer's committed date. Next, effective utilization of transportation space. A quick question for you guys. I have two customers. Let us say one customer is from Europe. Okay, both the customers are from Europe. And my plant is somewhere in Cincinnati, USA. Now, I have decided I'd like to prioritize these two customers. One customer has actually ordered from my company some 10,000 pallets worth of material, and another customer has ordered 15,000 pallets worth of material. Whom do you think is my priority customer according to the order management? Hello?
Customer with a 50.
Yep. So this is what we look into. We say the customer with 15,000 pallets, whoever ordered, is actually priority for us. Now let us look from transportation perspective, how different this goes on. Let us assume a very small container for ease of our understanding. We have a container which can actually accommodate only 10,000 pallets. Now a customer who has ordered 10,000 pallets, for him I can immediately fill a container and I can send it to Europe. But another customer whom actually the sales department or purchase department is thinking as a priority, who is actually for whom I have to handle 15,000 pallets, you know what I require? I require one container which I can fill for 10,000 pallets, and next I require one more container where I am only able to fill 5,000 and I am leaving the other 5,000. Here, when we look at a perspective where transportation cost is more because I am sending it from USA to Europe, had this been domestic, I can just ignore it because it's matter of few dollars. But here, I am trying to move it from USA to Europe. So when I am trying to do that, I see that I am actually sending a half a container, unload half a container which is empty. So in this case, I am losing more money in terms of transportation cost. So here the perspective changes. I would say the person who has ordered 10,000 pallets is rather a preferential customer to me, because with him I am able to gain more returns. So this is what I meant by effective utilization of transportation space, because this equally dominates our sales and purchase order process. Next, addressing international compliances. Now, most of the times we do not tend to look into it when we create sales orders and purchase orders. We decide that a customer, some international customer, would actually require this material, and we simply create a sales order. And during the creation of sales order, we are really not looking into how to differently tackle the situations, like when we are trying to send certain material, these materials might be restricted in some countries. And like the best example is US. Okay, so US is never going ahead and will do any business transactions with Iraq. So this is an international compliance. We have a different module called GTS, which does some integration with, with our ECC and GTS, but that is very limited in scope. At a point of time, we also want a transportation department to know to which countries it has to perform transportation operations and to which not. Why a transportation department needs to know? Sometimes when we are moving our goods, we need to pass from one territory to another, and at such times we have an equal chance of passing through that territory where the country is holding no business links, or where the country is holding no bilateral links with that government. So when a transportation planner is trying to plan, he needs to see that this consignment should never touch those territorial borders of that country, because there is a trade and international compliance over there. Next, addressing general safety and compliance issues. So this also the sales or the purchase department never looks into it. We normally, what we do something called as consolidation. We consolidate inbound deliveries when it comes to, we consolidate purchase orders into, different inbound deliveries of purchase order into one shipment. And when it comes to SD, we consolidate multiple outbound deliveries into one shipment. So normally, what is the criteria on which we do that? We do that based on if it is the same customer, or if it is the same source location and destination location. And in that case, I don't mind combining different deliveries, because I'd like to send it in one shipment. So this is how we see. But normally when we see from transportation industry, just having a source and destination location same cannot be taken as the right okay, because sometimes we might have different goods which are not supposed to go with one another. You might have some chemical goods which are not explosive, but probably by keeping those two goods in the same container, they might become reactive. You might have certain material which might contain some lithium or some petrol, or some lead inside it, which can become, reactive. So these things are not again handled. Now there is a place where we do handle it in ECC, and we call that as EH&S, Environment, Health and Safety. We do that there, but that is also very limited, because when we do that, we are doing during the sales order creation. That is when the customer is asking for the material, at that time we are looking into it. That is not the right way, because we are looking at order entry. We are never looking at order execution. We are never looking at planning in the very first place. So the second stanza actually speaks about these different issues where there is a lot of gap between the core operations which are held and the transportation aspects. Can I go to the next slide?
Ajay, the last point, were you indicating to that mixed loading check?
Yes, because
okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am indicating to the mixed loading check. Not only mixed loading check. sometimes what happens is when we are doing the mixed loading also, we require some extra documents. Like when we look into SD, when we have an option that once a sales order is created, we send something called as sales order confirmation. That is to the customer. But if in this present industry, if we see now, most of the goods are handled by whom? They are handled by the carrier. So normally for a carrier, what is it we give? We only have something called as a bill of lading, which is taken from the carrier, and we just give the sales order information to the carrier. By the end of the day, it is a carrier who is taking your goods. It's not your company who is delivering it to customer. So most important documents, who should have it? Carrier should have it, rather than the sales department or ECC shipment department having it. So that is what I meant in the second point when I said compliance issues. The first is on mixed loading and the second is on compliance issues. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, so coming to transportation management, so as we all know, SAP TM is not LE transportation, it's an altogether a different module. So transportation management is introduced by SAP AG as a solution for this transportation management. So as a solution for what? It covers all these different aspects, where each aspect at times can be a different requirement or a project for a company. At least I have not seen all these aspects embedded into one potential requirement for a client, but that can change. So all these solutions, whatever are there, these are implemented using SAP TM, and presently the version running is 9.3. It started with 8 version, later it came with 8.9, later it came with 9.0, next it came with 9.1, 9.2 and 9.3. So these versions 9 to 9.3, these 4 versions, 9, 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, these 4 versions were actually released in just these 3 years. So by this we can see that for the couple of from the last few years, there has been a huge rise in the need for transportation. So that is the reason SAP came with different versions in these 3 years. Now, let us take a simple example. I have actually taken Asian example. So here, let us come with a very abstract question. I want to move the goods. Let us say I want to move the goods from a place to place. When I ask someone, which is the best way to move, how do we answer? Now, let's say I want to move the goods from India to Singapore. And if I ask someone, look, I would like to move some goods from India because I have a customer in Singapore, and just tell me what is the best option. That's a very vague question. That's not the right way to ask, because there are many options for me. I can move it through sea, I can move it through road, I can also move it through air. Now, most of the guys, what we tend to think is, we only tend to think the cheapest option. Whenever we say, what is the best way to move a material from place A to place B, we only think from one side of the coin, that is, we think only the cheapest costing structure is the best structure. So, but it's not, because we first need to decide before we go to which mode of transport we need to select. There are certain other rules to see, like in this slide if you see, if I would like to move the goods from India to Singapore, I actually have 4 options. 1, I can use ocean. 2, I can use road. I can use air also, and I can go with multimodal. That is, at one point of a time I can use ocean, and after that I can put it in a truck, and after that I can take it to any nearby airport, and at an airport again I can load it into a flight in a cargo carrier, and then I can send it. So I can use even a mixed concept. But which is the best one? Because so many factors actually come to decide the best one. So this is where, whenever an order is created, that is, whenever a sales order is created, or whenever a delivery is created, at this moment only this planning has to be done. So this is where most of the confusions come in a transportation industry. I am speaking from industry in particular. First thing is how feasible the material is with means of transport. Now, if I am trying to send, let's say, a very high valuable material like say gold or rather diamonds. So, when I would like to import it from Gulf countries, I'd like to import some gold. So, when I would like to do that, the means of transport plays a very vital role, because the amount of quantity which I would like to carry when I sit on a flight, and when there is no other means of transport however there, but to the neighboring countries when you would like to go, there is also sea. So when I'd like to go on a flight and when I'd like to take a voyage, there are two different amount of different quantities I can carry. When I am going on a flight, I am supposed to carry a predefined weight of gold. Why? Because with this particular means of transport, I am not entitled to carry more gold. So, how feasible the material is with means of transport is something which a normal planners from order management or anywhere from this perspective tend to ignore. And next thing is material dimensions. When I for a let's say we have got some 100 kgs of iron. So when I am carrying 100 kgs of iron, I as a planner would like to plan based on its weight, because iron is a heavy substance. Now the same 100 kgs, if I get a requirement, let's say for cotton, so in that case I would be a very poor planner, and my plan result would be very faulty if I plan based on weight, because 100 kgs cotton might actually occupy my complete truck, though the weight is 100 kgs. So in this case, I need to plan based on my volume and material properties, like hazardous material. Like I'd like, when we say whenever we are moving something in truck or car, in a flight or through ocean containers, it is not that we always tend to put our product only. We have multiple products in and around. So let us take a simple example of ocean carrier. Now sometimes what happens is, some materials we are not supposed to put in airtight carrier. That is, we have containers where we actually have an option to airtight it. So it's like you put the material inside and you close it. It's like vacuum. So there's no air inside it, and even when ship does the raw sailing over the ocean, whatever the waters which fall, they actually don't tend to react. But some materials cannot be put inside a pure vacuum or an airtight container. But the problem is, if you don't put it in airtight container, then it becomes corrosive, because salt water tends to react with it. And sometimes what we do, there can be two different materials which are not explosive. Like a material A, most of the times when we tend to import in ocean industry, we import raw materials. We import raw chemicals, raw materials. So what happens is, when these raw materials are imported, raw material A might not be reactive. Material B might also not be reactive. But when you keep material A and material B beside each other, they might tend to become reactive. So here, taking an example from order management, we might have different sales orders, we might have different purchase orders. Today we want to send some 100 sales orders out of our shipping point. We generally do not decide how to do that, because we do not know which material is actually reacting with what. I mean, these are different industrial challenges. I try to amalgamate all industrial challenges into one. Next, we have something called as compliances. Like we see, last year Russia has actually come with this rule. Before this, there were actually some routes from where US, Canada were actually using at a point of time Russia also for the movement of some of their products. But what happened is, Russia came with a ban. It started to say that it has imposed embargo on food import from US, Canada, Australia and European Union. So what effect is this having now? The effect is, whenever we want to move any goods, we always think about an optimized lane. When I say optimized lane, I generally mean that route from where I can reach the destination quickly. So if I need to reach a destination quickly, I might need to pass through a country. When I say passing through a country, I really do not mean that I'm going into the heart of the country and I am coming outside of it. It could also be that I am just touching the international borders, like say the seaport of that country, because I might need to, show certain compliance documents over there so that they can give me a pass through their country. But in these instances, what happens when I am trying to pass, Russia might not allow my consignment to pass through them. So this is something which during the execution someone has to think. We generally do not think about this. Next we see vehicle constraints. Apart from all these plannings, we have something called as vehicles, which we never tend to look in ECC. So whenever we are creating, whenever we are trying to deliver a sales or a purchase order, what happens? We do not look into vehicle capacity. We assume that the vehicle capacity is infinite. That's why we try to consolidate as many documents as we can into one. But vehicles do have a capacity constraint. And next thing is advance bookings and confirmations. There is a mistake in the PowerPoint. Probably I hit an enter somewhere. So these both actually are one. Advance booking and confirmation. So what do I mean by advance booking and confirmation? Normally when we see from ECC perspective, there is planning done, but that is not for transportation. That is done for production. You have something called as MRP, where you have an option to plan demand. You have something called as demand planning. So what do you do in demand planning? You sense the demand, rather you forecast the demand. You know that in the month of December, how many customers would come to you. So no sooner the November hits your calendar, you start manufacturing extra material so that by December, these material are ready. And when customer comes, you serve them with your materials. So what are you doing? You're doing some forecasting. Normally this forecasting is done to keep our products ready so that whenever customer comes, we can deliver it. But when we look from transportation perspective, whenever we want to book any ocean space, or let's say even flight space for that matter, we might need to take, when it comes to ocean, there are certain countries where you need to plan at least 1 month in advance. That is, if you'd like to book your ocean space for the months of October, you need to be ready in the month of September. But you have a sales order created at a real time. That is, a sales order might come today, and the customer, let us say, who is from Singapore, is actually requesting a material from USA in 10 days. And for we, as a fact, know that when we want to book a cargo consignment from USA to Singapore, we at least need 8 days time. But here the customer is asking and we do not have time. So what is happening? We also need to take advance bookings into consideration. So just like we sense a sales order demand, somewhere the logistician should also sense transportation demand. So he has to sense in the months of October how many containers I need to book even before a sales order is created, or even before a company requests some other things from the vendor. How much space I have to book in different means of transport is something a transportation planner needs to do it, because right now transportation is not actually looking into just-in-time concept. Like, it's not that we immediately ask something and they are ready to deliver their resources. It does happen, but most of the times it happens in domestic cases only. To say we would like to move something all around USA, then that's very much possible. But if we say that we'd like to move something from USA to Europe, it doesn't happen immediately, because they have something called as advance bookings coming into picture. So vehicle constraints, and apart from vehicle constraints, we have one more constraint, which is a constraint all throughout the universe, and that is time. An example to take, we have actually decided that to move a material, let us say from Cincinnati to Phoenix, it would take, they have planned it for safe, they have planned it that it would take 2 days. So they have planned it for a couple of days, and all of a sudden, the truck which is actually taking care of this responsibility broke down somewhere. So in this case, what can we do? Even after the truck actually comes to, the truck is up and running, even after that, the time taken cannot be, manipulated. And next thing is distance. We cannot change the distance. A truck has to pass, let's say, 8 hours a day to reach a destination, and 2 days the truck broke down. Frankly, the customer is not worried about it, because when you actually deliver it after the delay, when you miss the delivery date, you also have something called as penalty cost. Some companies also charge something called as penalty cost if the delivery doesn't reach on time. So if we see, the dimensions of time and distance take a very important role when we plan the transportation. And if we see, there are certain, next thing is, the best example is what has happened last year. So because I was working there at that time, so I took this example. So in Milwaukee, once what has happened is, when a transportation was happening, the Milwaukee was actually went through such a bad weather at that time, that for a couple of days a particular lane was blocked, and we had a transportation, we had a truck which was supposed to deliver it, and it couldn't do it. So there is again something called as nature, which always takes a vital role. And nature might not influence a sales order or a purchase order, but it does for sure influence transportation. And next we have something called as transportation cost, like we spoke before, that this is from a different perspective. Like when we say a customer who has ordered 10,000 pallets, and a customer who has ordered 15,000 pallets, which one to take into feature? Should we take space into feature, that is transportation space into feature, or should we take transportation cost into feature? And when it comes to transportation cost, we define different ways. We can define something as low cost, high cost, because sometimes if you would like to send something to a customer, and if he says I want it in 1 day, or let's say in couple of hours, if the destination is nearby, so in that case we actually go for a high transportation cost. And sometimes there might be customers who say, I am not worried when you will deliver the material, I can happily wait for a month or so. In that case, we actually tend to look for a lower transportation cost. So this is where, the costing structure takes a very important role when we are trying to outsource. We'll actually look into that when we get deeper into the course. So transportation cost is also something which actually a logistician has to plan. So these are various things which needs to be taken into consideration. Now all these things cannot be handled in normal systems. So for these reasons, they have come out with a different system called SAP TM. So this SAP TM is a planning system like ECC. If you look into ECC, I should not call ECC. Right now it is called EHP. So the SAP ERP system, which is presently running on SAP EHP, is something called as OLTP system, that is online transaction processing system, where you only process transactions. But the present system, TM system, is actually SCM system, that is supply chain management system. It actually does analytics, or rather it has got semi-intelligence to perform its own operations, because here you're doing something called as planning. Like if we look into SCM, the evolution of SCM, when we look, SCM started with a module called SAP APO. I had a chance to work on demand planning also. So this SAP APO has a a component called demand planning. So what does this demand planning do? It actually plans your demand. And after that, slowly SAP APO extended to something called as TPVS, which is called as Transportation Planning and Vehicle Scheduling. So at that time, in the initial years, I would say in the years of 2000, APO also had an option called Transportation Planning and Vehicle Scheduling. So at that time, APO, apart from planning the demand, they were also planning the vehicles. But APO understood that this transportation planning and vehicle scheduling, it was not used to it was not utilized completely, because APO also had certain limitations. So what they did, this tool called transportation planning and vehicle scheduling, they removed it out of APO. So if we see the present versions of APO, we have only demand planning, supply network collaboration, production planning, and details scheduling. Why I'm speaking about APO is we do have a link with APO here. So these three modules have been shifted to a part called APO, and this part, which is called as transportation planning and vehicle scheduling, this has been removed out of APO, and SAP came with a new system which is called as transportation management system, where apart from all the functionalities of which we spoke before, with that it also kept this tool called TPVS with a name called optimizer into the TM system. So from then, actually, that is with the advent of optimizer in SAP TM, we see a huge demand, or rather I would say an increasing demand for transportation, which has started. So if we see this optimizer, what does this optimizer have? As the name itself says, optimizer is something which optimizes. It's very evident from that. But there is a concept called as postman syndrome. You know, in transportation industry, we have something called as postman syndrome. Like, let us imagine a postman. He goes to the post office every day morning, and he collects certain parcels. Now, after collecting some parcels, you know, he sees that some parcels are going to the eastern side, some parcels need to be delivered to the west, and some parcels need to be delivered to south and to north. It's a different issue. Nowadays, we have got different postmen who are working separately for southern side of the city, some postmen to the northern side of city. But that's a different thing. But when we look at from a theory perspective, this postman who is having all these parcels, he is some parcels he is supposed to deliver in the east, and some parcels he is supposed to deliver in the west, and some in the north, and some to the south. Now he is standing at the center. Now his problem is, if he wants to deliver something in the east, next he has to come back again to the same center because he needs to travel to the west. In that case, why should the postman carry all the parcels from post office? He can keep the parcels in post office itself, and he can take only parcels from east to the east, right? And after covering east, he might need to go to south. He can easily go from east to south, but the problem is, after covering south, he might need to come back to north. So what's happening at a place? He's doing a double journey, or rather he's coming to the same place. Now when we put this into transportation perspective, he's actually becoming a reason for a transportation delay. He's again becoming a reason for extra transportation cost, and he's also increasing my my cost, because he's traveling a lot. For covering 100 kilometers, he's actually going 100 kilometers, and he's again traveling back the same 100. So for me, I am delivering 100 kilometers for their customer, but in reality I am traveling 200 kilometers. So if we see, we have these problems. And if anyone is from management background, or if anyone is from engineering background, in engineering and even in management, that is guys who underwent business analyst training, they know that there are certain formula which were always used by management people or even by engineers. To name a few, we had something called as linear equations. So at a point of time, people were using linear equations. It's nothing but a graph, a graphical way of calculating, the optimized cost. And next, we also had something called as quantitative methods, which are used by engineers and even management science. And some of the quantitative methods are called as simplex method. So why I am speaking all these things is these are different formulae which are used by statisticians. These different formulae have been changed to different back-end programs. These different formulae have been changed to different strategies into TM system. So whenever I say optimizer, and that is the TPVS APO optimizer which we are using in the TM system, let us say you get a sales order which says I want to move this from place to A to place to B. Then what it does in the background is it actually checks all these random equations. It actually checks all these random statistic methods. Based on that, it will propose the optimized solution. So that is the reason TM is completely OLAP system, where it only does analytical processing. TM also does execution, but the execution factor is still dominated by ECC only, that is with ERP only. However, TM takes a pivotal role in terms of planning. Now, the advantages of TM: you can use TM across all the modules. So if you see here, I said it embraces all the aspects, like what? Transportation request, that is, you can plan a sales order. Normally what we do, we always plan a sales order. We never plan a delivery. If we see in conventional order-based processes, a customer requests for a sales order. What is it we do? We decide whether the sales order can be committed for a delivery date. And that's it. Once the sales order is committed for a delivery date, we are not bothered about delivery-based planning. A sales order is there. We know that the sales order has to be delivered after 10 days. So we plan it today, that is, we create a sales order and plan it. And when the 10th day comes, people who are working in industry like both of you might have seen these issues also. So when the 10th day comes, when we are really trying to execute the delivery, we face so many issues. Sometimes we see that stock is not there. Most of the times we do see that. So what's happening? You are always planning based on your sales order. 10 days before you have planned something. How sure are you that the same planning or the same resources will be available on the 10th day? So what do we do in TM? We have an option to plan based on sales order, and you also need to plan based on delivery, because sales order planning is done at a past date. Delivery is your present date now. You need to see whether we need to plan again, because we need to see that resources are there during the delivery creation. Now apart from that, what does it do? Apart from calculating the transportation request, that is from sales order or delivery or from purchase order also, planning the transportation request by finding the best carrier, by finding the best resource, by finding the best schedule, by optimizing the load. So these are all the things what we spoke till now. So how is this done? This is handled by the functionality called optimizer. Like I said before, it has got some rules which act redundantly, and these rules actually come out with a solution. Now, confirm the transportation request. So it also does confirmation. Why? Because a sales order needs a confirmation. Normally when we see a sales order, a simple question or rather an issue for you guys, normally what do? A customer asks for a material. When we create a sales order, there are basically two things we look into. One is how much time would it take for us to have the material, that is one side, and second thing is how much time would it take for a truck or something to dispatch the material to the customer. So basically two at a very higher level, two things happen for a sales order. What is it? Internal planning in your company, and next thing is external planning in your company. Internal planning is to make material available to you. External planning is you put that material, or rather you do the goods issue, and how much time it takes for the customer to reach it. That's the second thing. How can we decide at the sales order level or purchase order level? I know when material will be available to me because I am manufacturing it or I am procuring it. But how can I say that, like we have a concept called as route determination. In route determination, we have something called as transit time. So when a purchase order is created also, we can, based on goods processing time, we can decide how much time would it take for it to receive. The same way when it comes to sales order also, how much time would it take to move to customer? You have something called as transportation time. How can we decide the transportation time? Because this transportation time is actually having so many hiccups. So normally this planning is done from logistics side in ECC, which is incomplete. So that is what I meant here when I said confirm transportation request. This confirmation of transportation request doesn't come from SAP SD or SAP MM. This has to come from TM system. Next thing is perform transportation execution. Now why did I mention transportation execution here? When I said ECC is actually executing system. In ECC we create deliveries. In ECC we do the goods issue. Then why am I saying transportation system as execution system? Because in ECC we can only do the goods issue, period. We can only send our material outside our shipping point. That is, we can send our material into the truck and say and bid a goodbye to the truck. That's the only thing you can do in ECC. What if the material is out of your plant and just out of your plant the truck broke down? Whose responsibility is that? And what if you actually send that material to seaport, and there we came to know that containers are not available? So the goods issue, that is the time when we are issuing our material out of the plant, we treat it as execution, but in reality it is not execution, it is the starting point of execution. So from that place, somewhere we need to have at least a visibility, if not control. It's very good if we can have visibility and control also, but at least we should have a visibility about where our material is moving, which ECC cannot provide. So that is why I mentioned here, perform transportation execution, and finally settle the cost. Now SAP TM as a better edge. SAP TM not only works as standalone. So when I say standalone, I actually mean the SAP TM implementation for those companies where they do not have production or sales or purchase. Best examples are logistics execution companies. Like we might have, Bright Logistics, Siva Logistics, DHL, FedEx. So these guys actually do not, they work on independent systems because they do not have any concept of selling any product. They only sell the transportation service. So in that case, we can use SAP TM system as a standalone system. And the second thing is integrated TM. So this is where I believe you guys should get a very good understanding. So in integrated system, we can integrate TM with number one, ECC. Why to integrate with ECC? Because whenever we integrate with ECC, we can plan the sales orders, we can plan the deliveries, and we can also plan the purchase orders. So for that, we can integrate with ECC. We have something called as EWM, Extended Warehouse Management. So we can also integrate with this. So why does it needs to be integrated with EWM? Because normally, whenever we say, when we are creating inbound or outbound deliveries, Guys, I'm taking SDMM examples more because you guys have a fair understanding on it. So uh, when we create some inbound or outbound deliveries, you have something as an option picking. You remember? So in reality, you ordered a material, you manufactured a material rather, you have requested, let's say this FedEx guy, you have requested this FedEx guy to move your material. So who is actually doing the picking? FedEx guy is coming to your plant. He's actually picking your material. So normally in delivery, when we say picking, that's very abstract. We actually do not tend to inform saying who is actually doing this picking activity. Is some person inside the storage location doing the picking activity, or is some person outside person is actually coming and doing the picking activity? We don't know. So what does EWM? Why is EWM integrated with TM system? Because if a FedEx guy, you have informed a FedEx guy to come to Cincinnati and to pick up your material. Let us say you have informed today that he needs to pick up on 28th of this month. So on 28th he needs to know the exact location where he should come, and on 28th he needs to know at which storage location he needs to stand, because nowadays most of the transportation companies are also doing packing. Initially packing was done inside your plant, so no one was permitted. But nowadays this LSP, this FedEx guy can directly come into your storage location or into your warehouse or into your yard. He can sit there, he can take your material and he can start packing your material. So he needs to know where to do that. So at such instances, we actually integrate it with EWM. Now we have something called as GTS. Now a best example what I can take is okay. So since both of you are residing in US, so whenever US is trying to send any material to Canada. Now, Canada and USA are into free trade agreement. That's true. But whenever US is actually trying to send any material to Canada, there are certain extra documents which are required. So when US is sending to Canada, apart from the information about what material is sent, number of packages which are there inside that material. I mean, not every material will have this option of number of packages, but this is one trade compliance which is there between US and Canadian government. So at such times, what is it you need to do? The person, you have no responsibility. You simply said you have issued your goods out of your plant. So goods issue is over. You don't have any problem. Somewhere you said goods issue is over. Some FedEx guy has come and that FedEx guy has actually picked up your material and that guy has actually reached the borders of Canada. Now there the Canadian government stopped him and that Canadian government is saying, why don't you go back? Because we do not see the relevant documents. As a matter of fact, the documents are not carried by the company. The documents are carried by the carrier. Because whenever a customs authority comes and checks, whom does he check? He checks the carrier because the documents have to be there with the carrier. So whenever we have those projects where compliance takes a very important stand, at that time we integrate GTS with TM system. And I also mentioned something called as CRM. So why is CRM integrated with TM system? CRM has an option called analytics. So what does CRM do? In CRM, you have something called as rating. Sometimes what CRM does is, I mean, it is in those projects where CRM is completely running inside the company, where to be more precise, you might have SD and CRM integrated. So at such instances, the sales orders or purchase orders are actually created in CRM, and then the information is sent to SD. So at that moment, CRM guy will first has to decide which carrier should be determined, because some companies might not prefer some carriers. Some companies, even customers, some customers might not prefer some carriers. So here the CRM comes into picture to decide which is the best rated carrier for that customer. So at such instances, this generally doesn't happen in US or in Europe, but I have seen this happening much in Asian Pacific countries. Like I have seen this happening with Japan and China. So there they actually tend to, most of the customers, they also have preference about which carrier should actually come into their premises. So that is when CRM is used, and we have something called as EH&S, environment, health and safety. So whatever examples I spoke about, vehicle incompatibilities, and this material cannot go with this material, whether this material is hazardous material or not. So these things we always plan during sales order or purchase order. But here EHS comes into picture because you can integrate that with transportation management. And the last and the most important one, EM, event management. So this is a very I would say a very small module. Event management is also part of SCM system, and this module didn't have much importance before. It did have, but the role was very limited. By the emergence of transportation module, this module also started to increase. So what does this do is it provides updates. A best example is we order something through Amazon, and we try to go and track our consignment. We just enter our number, customer number or order number, and we see the status. The same way, when we go and when we take the services of FedEx or someone, we enter something called as our tracking ID, and we enter the tracking ID, we come to know where exactly our consignment is. And when we go with automatic message system, like we have an option with presently we have option with FedEx. So if we select this option called as automatic message system, you don't even need to go and check the tracking status. If your material reaches at one particular place, it will trigger SMS to yourself, or it will actually trigger a mail to your mailbox. And there are certain instances where it can also send a postal card. So these are called as automated message system. So event management, where different events are reported. Even meeting an accident is an event. Sometimes you are good staying at a toll gate is also an event. Bad weather and your vehicle stopping somewhere is also an event. Some companies, what they do is they keep a restriction saying once you start from a place, you are not supposed to stop anywhere. Okay, so for such companies, there are certain events like having a flat tire. So even that can become an event. So it depends on your business how you want to categorize different events. So this TM system can also be integrated with EM system. And coming to different scenarios, initially when TM was launched, it was only covering LSP scenario. That is only those industries where the primary business functionality is to go for transportation. That is the only service they offer is transportation, like FedEx. So there this module was used. Slowly they extended it to shipper scenario. If you see here, this is the first thing I mentioned. However, the evolution was it came from LSP, and later it went to shipper scenario. What is shipper scenario? Your main business function is not transportation service like FedEx. We are not providing any transportation service. We are directly providing our products. So those companies from transportation side, they call them as shipper companies. And next you have something called as outsourced transportation. So this is slowly, I mean, this works a lot when it comes to certain places of the world, like Europe and even in Singapore. So what is meaning of outsourced transportation is the companies will have no tie-ups with any logistics provider. Today they might receive a sales order, and today he might broadcast or he might tender something saying, today whoever gives the cheapest, I want to prefer that person. And immediately next day, whoever quotes the cheapest price, they'd like to go with them. So that is called as outsourced transportation. And now it involves all modes of transport, that is road transport. When I say road transport, I mean all the activities and all the different functionalities from different countries are handled in road. Air transportation, so before 9.0 there was a very little functionality on air transportation, because air transportation actually needs to take airline industry into picture. So some options were not introduced. Later, air transportation has become a very good feature in SAP TM. We also have ocean transportation. Ever since 9.0, ocean transportation is also at a very good pace. Now, what I didn't mention here is we have a very new scenario nowadays, and I think even our systems have it, which is called as rail scenario. So even this, that is integration with different rail cars, even this feature is now there with TM system. So TM covers all aspects of it. And coming to how actually the TM system looks, give me a minute, guys. So basically what I want to say is it actually covers all aspects of transportation across all modes, across all industries which are related to transportation, that is air industry, ocean industry, rail industry, and normal road industry. And what are different functions it supports? Domestic inbound process and international inbound process. So let us not look into a lot of descriptions, because these descriptions always tend to be confusing. When I say domestic inbound and international inbound, I mean at a very simple level, I mean you can do your purchases integration with TM. Domestic outbound and international outbound, with this I mean that I can do sales integration with TM. And apart from this, a very small note, because I have seen this happening in recent years, you also have an option to integrate production. Why do we integrate production with TM system? Sometimes what happens is, after you produce something in one storage location, you might need to move it to another storage location. So you cannot call this as inbound or outbound, because whenever we say inbound or outbound, when we say inbound, we mean something coming inside our company from outside our company. And when we say outbound, we mean something which is going out of our company. But when it comes with storage location transfers, you are not supposed to call it as inbound transfer or outbound transfer. That is why we generally use the name stock transfer. So inbound transfers and outbound transfers, even that can be handled with SAP TM. So stock transfers can also be handled with SAP TM. Next, you have got the concept called full container loads and less container loads. These are used generally by ocean industry. And when we look into this course, I take actually a one-day course, one-day exclusive class on how actually things happen in transportation industry. So at that time we look into what is full container load, less container load. And apart from this, you also have something called as full truck and less than truck. So these things are also handled here. You have something called as air freight. You have got something called as rail freight. Nowadays you also have a new concept called parcel shipment. So this also came with the advent of 9.1. So from 9.1 you have a new functionality called parcel shipment. So as it says, it's basically about commissioning. You'll have some parcel agents to whom you'll be giving it. Now coming to TM system, how does it look? See, this is how it looks. If you see, there are no transactions to perform. You do not have any transaction codes in TM system. So you click this way. Once you click this, it actually takes you to a different place where you need to do the planning. So it is completely web portal. It's 100% integrated with web portal. So you do not have any transactions to perform. That is the reason I said it is a pure OLAP system, that is analytical processing system. However, there are transactions, but those transactions are very minute. Probably I would say at least I have not met more than 10 transactions in my years in TM. So this is web based and it covers all the processes. Now if we scroll down a bit, it also has an option to use process integrator, that is SAP PI. And if you scroll down, I spoke about TPVS optimizer. Now just to add, this is called as VSR optimizer when it comes to TM. SAP just renamed it so that they can promote the tool in a better way. So what does it do? It actually does automatically the planning. It selects the best resource, it selects the best route, it selects the best carrier, it selects the cheaper cost one. When I say cheaper cost can also be a it could also be one planning indent. Sometimes not a cheaper cost. Sometimes a higher cost might also be might also become a factor to plan. So it depends on the urgency of the business. Next, freight units. We'll look into freight units later once we get into the system. Next, it can be integrated with GIS, because nowadays if we see, we would like to see where our consignment is through Google Maps and things like that. So we can directly integrate with GIS to see it. Carrier selection, so this comes under tendering. We touch all these things when we learn what actually the transportation is, because most of the terms are from transportation. Next, you have got something called as charge management, that is how to calculate the charges. So all these things are handled in TM system. Now, if you have any questions, please let me know. Anything.
So Ajay, you would be showing all this functionality in TM 9.3, right? Or
yes.
Okay.
I would be showing all these things except something called as optimizer load functionality, because we are working on testing systems, so we do not have the optimizer build up. But I will also show how the optimizer works, because it is very easy to create a simulation for me in the system. And integrations with GTS, integrations with CRM. You see, this I cannot show you in this training environment, but wherever those topics comes, I can actually put forth the real examples about how that would happen and where that would happen, at which point that would reflect in the system. I'll be able to show it to you, because we have very limited capacity when it comes with IDA systems, you must be aware. And apart from this, to add, from all the systems what I have seen, the systems provided by Expertsoft are the best systems I have seen so far. So yes, I would touch all the aspects of whatever I spoke till now in our course. Some I might not be, like CRM. I might tend to speak more on CRM and GTS, but it really doesn't add any value for you guys, because you are working on ECC environment, right? So the same thing happens in training level also. So whenever such topics come, I would put forth all the information and I will show you where this happens at what point of time. But yes, I'll be touching all the points whatever I spoke, probably more.
Okay. Would you be sharing any TM course documents? Like, I mean, there are TM 100, 200 due. Would you be sharing any of those things?
Yes. Number one, first is Naveen will give you the course content. Apart from course content, number one, the couple of days initially, we would not be speaking on any systems. We would be speaking on domain aspects of transportation industry, because we need to know the domain aspects of what are different terms which are covered in transportation and things like that. And after that, we would go with TM 100, which actually speaks about normal overview of transportation. Next, we have got something called as TM 110, which actually speaks of complete customization in TM. And because I have been in transportation for quite long, So that's why I'm saying this. What SAP did is it has subdivided 110 into 130 and 200 and things like that. But as a matter of fact, everything is of 110 only, which they have subcategorized it. And so I'll be looking into 110, and apart from that, I'll be covering, I'll be taking all the best practices documents which are provided by SAP, like integrations with ECC, how these things are done, charge management. So what are the best practices documents which are there by SAP, I'll be covering all through that with course. To say in simple, SAP TM 100, SAP TM 110, integration with ECC, these are the 3 different documents from SAP side which I'll be providing it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, any more?
No, that would be
Stuff. Most of the candidates who are who have been trained, or most of the people who are working on transportation right now, that is on this module, most of the guys have come from SD background only. Very few have come from GTS and different backgrounds like me. So the reason is, I would say, even without SD or MM background, we can work on TM and learn TM because it works as standalone also. But I would say I don't look into too much technical verbiage when it comes to SD. But if you just have a normal idea about what sales is, what is sales order, what is delivery and billing, that much idea is very much sufficient to learn this module, because you do not have so many transactions to bother, because this is where I have seen, because I also worked on multiple modules, so like we all are. So when we work on multiple modules, it's like when we tend to go to a new module, we feel like it's like again we are diving into another ocean. So it's not like that, and we do not have so many transactions to remember. It's all a simple click with the mouse. You cannot work on TM without a mouse. So it's such an easy system to go with. So we look into your whatever.
And how long is the course? How long is the class?
I actually plan for 30 hours, but sometimes it tends to go some 5 hours more also, because sometimes we might have people who are more interested in digging more out of it.
And so,
So